HR1, the Democrats' new voter access bill. A petition has begun circulating online demanding the impeachment of Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi. Now, while they may make it seem like this petition was made because of HR1, it's been around for some time, and there's almost 850,000 signatures on this petition. Now, following the passing of HR1 with no Republican support, many people are now sharing this petition again, saying, impeach Nancy Pelosi. For those that aren't familiar, HR1 would dramatically expand access to voting in ways that Republicans say are stripping away voting security and integrity. For instance, every state would be required to have mail-in voting, early voting, and it would even allow people to designate someone to deliver ballots for them, meaning you will get a ton of ballot harvesting and ballot chasing. I'm not a fan of this. Some of the things in the bill I actually think are okay, and we can talk about this. But I don't like the idea of these harvesters going to nursing homes and going to places where people aren't vested in voting at all, and then invested in voting at all. And then they go to these people and say, yeah, we'll vote anyway. And they give them gifts and stuff like that. We have seen that. I do believe there should be some speed bumps to voting, simply to say, are you sure you want to vote? Are you sure you want to vote for this person? The issue is not whether or not someone has the right to vote. I think everybody does. The issue is whether or not people will be exploited by manipulative, deceptive politicians and ballot harvesters who may be doing illegal things. And this will make it easier for them. We've already seen one woman in Texas, because of Project Veritas, get arrested. Well, let's read the story, and then we'll go through what the actual HR1 says. Nancy's treason calls to impeach Pelosi after her election voting right bill passes without a single GOP vote. They say a petition calling for the impeachment of the House Speaker, as well as Chuck Schumer, has garnered more than 840,000 signatures online. They say the petition began circulating online after Pelosi and the House of Representatives pushed through an election reform bill in a slim 220 to 210 vote. The bill, called For the People Act, aims to restore faith in the American election system after former President Donald Trump repeatedly claimed the election was stolen from him. The bill, which now has to go through the Senate, would require all states to offer mail-in ballots, a minimum of 15 days of early voting, and calls for online and same-day voter registration. We'll go through a better article breaking down what this is, but let me show you this petition. Impeach Pelosi and Schumer. 844,235 people have signed as of the filming of this segment. It says, we the people ask that impeachment proceedings begin against Pelosi and Schumer for treason against the American people. Article 1, Section 5 of the U.S. Constitution provides that each House may determine the rules of its proceedings, punish its members for disorderly behavior, and with the concurrence of 2/3, expel a member. I do not believe this is a good idea. I don't think they should be impeached, but I also admit we have a very serious problem. We're going to talk about voting rights in HR1, and a lot of people are really scared about what it means. It may mean Republicans never win again. But you need to understand the context. A lot of people on the left are going to say very simply that you're trying to suppress the vote. This simply wants to, they want to make it easier for everyone to have the ability to vote. It's so simple, isn't it? You want people like Nancy Pelosi and Mitch McConnell to be in power forever? Voting is a civic duty. It requires responsibility, requires a certain degree of practice. It's interesting that many people will seek to vote for no reason other than tribal satisfaction. That is dangerous for our democracy. I know we live in a constitutional republic. I'm being somewhat facetious. Nancy Pelosi has been in for how long? She's not getting anything done. The progressives don't like her. The Republicans certainly don't like her, but she would win forever because you will have people show up to a nursing home and being like, Pelosi, right? Great. And they show up and just drop off the ballots, and you create very dangerous hyperpolarization. We need competition, and we need those who are actually voting to be paying attention and to be invested in the process. What they're proposing would not do that. Now, before we get into HR1, let me point out impeachment of Pelosi. And I think the real reason they're doing this is just, they wanted to impeach Trump. So they're saying, okay, well, then we'll impeach them. And it's just what it really says to me. And this is important. This petition is still going around. It's getting pushed heavily right now. The issue with it is that it shows we are so hyperpolarized that this HR1 bill is effectively saying we don't care how we will win, and you will never argue with us. You will never hold power. Again, it's going to be chaos because conservatives won't accept simply being a permanent minority with no ability to influence the vote. But I want to point something out, too. They need 60 votes in the Senate to pass this. It may be meaningless. I do want to also point out this petition reached 750,000 supporters 6 months ago, well before HR1 was passed. It reached 500,000 supporters a year ago and was created 2 years ago. So it's not like this is a new petition that just got a ton of attention. But again, I do think it matters because people are sharing it now in this context, and it has jumped a decent amount because of HR1. Let me read for you how Vox.com explains HR1. House Democrats' massive voting rights bill explained. The bill faces a steep climb in the U.S. Senate. Why call it a voting rights bill? That's framing. You could theoretically call it a bill to remove election security. It's just framing. This is the first thing you need to understand when it comes to media literacy. Vox.com is a pro-Democrat leftist source. So they're going to frame everything that's going to be beneficial to Democrats. Republicans' perspective is that HR1 is taking away election security and it's going to make fraud a lot easier. They do point this out, but you see how they call it a voting rights bill. I find it particularly interesting when you go to The Sun and they say it's a election reform bill. They say, where do they mention this? The petition is circulating online. The bill for the People Act aims to restore faith in the election. Anyway, they essentially say it's a election reform bill, right? That's probably a better way to phrase it because you're not pandering to the right or the left. It's a bill that will reform elections. Now, you want to ask questions about what that means? Let's get into it. Vox says House Democrats have passed HR1, their signature anti-corruption and voting rights reform bill, for the second time in 2 years. But even though their party now holds the majority in the Senate, the bill has a tough road ahead of it. They say it's an anti-corruption and voting rights bill. I can't stand the media. I absolutely detest the media. There's nothing that makes me angry. Actually, I was going to say there's nothing that makes me angry, but there is. Video games. Like playing a video game, get all frustrated. Like, I can't, Anti-corruption? You could call it pro-corruption. Is this an opinion piece? Is Vox writing opinion? What does NewsGuard say? NewsGuard says they don't handle the difference between news and opinion very well. Well, that's fair to say. They say, as the numeral suggests, HR1 and its Senate component, S1, also known as the For the People Act, are Democrats' first legislative priority. The sweeping democracy reform bill has been top of the list since House Democrats first took back the majority in 2018 midterms and immediately set out to expand voting rights and curb the influence of money in politics. There's a lot of ground covered, and it's nearly 800 pages. But some of its key points are creating a national system for automatic voter registration, putting in transparency requirements for political advertising, and instituting nonpartisan redistricting commissions to end partisan gerrymandering. Polling back in 2019 and now shows the bill is broadly popular with the public, but it went nowhere in the Republican-led Senate in 2019. Even with the current slim Democratic control, a 50-50 Senate with Kamala Harris breaking the tie, it will be incredibly difficult to pass with the required 60 votes to skirt the Senate filibuster. The politics are even tighter this time around. Some moderate House Democrats who voted for the bill before pushed more aggressively for changes in the current bill. The bill's future in the Senate is also untested, as then Majority Leader McConnell never allowed it to come to the floor in 2019. If Mitch McConnell is not willing to provide 10 Republicans to support this landmark reform, I think Democrats are going to step back and reevaluate the situation, said Rep. John Sarbanes of Maryland. The author of HR1 told Vox in a recent interview, there's all manner of ways you could redesign the filibuster so the bill would have a path forward. The filibuster basically states you need 60 votes. And I think that's incredibly important. We do not want simple majority laws being passed because it will result in chaos. There has to be some minority representation. With a 60 vote filibuster, it basically means that you have to convince some Republicans, which means you have to make some concessions. It's better this way. If they just won on a simple majority, the Democrats would steamroll through absolutely everything. Republicans would freak out and it would be chaos. They say one path that's being discussed is partially amending Senate filibuster rules to allow democracy reform legislation. You see what they do? Oh, these duplicitous. Democracy reform legislation like HR1 to advance on a simple majority vote and therefore potentially be able to pass in a party line vote. That would be different from fully blowing up the filibuster, but it still could get pushback from Senate institutionalists, even in the Democratic Party, like Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia, a staunch advocate for keeping the filibuster in place. Senator Amy Klobuchar, the chair of the Senate Rules Committee, which will mark up the bill and move it forward, said she wants to bring the bill to the floor and see what the support for it is before she moves on to potential filibuster reform. We'll go to the floor. That's when we see where we are, Klobuchar told Vox in an interview, saying her committee will look to see, is there filibuster reform that could be done generally or specifically? Democrats are arguing that voting and democracy reforms are popular and long overdue. Let me explain something to you. When Vox.com, which is funded to the tune of, I believe they were bought up with like $200 million or whatever from NBC. When they come out with these stories and they say things like anti-corruption bill, voting rights bill, regular people are manipulated by that. That's not what this is. It's not an anti-corruption bill. The fair assessment is that they're trying to make voting more accessible to more people. What that could result in is exploitation, fraud, and corruption. If someone can just go and collect votes from people, how do you know the votes are actually from those people? It's would require a staunch security process. They're actually getting rid of these hurdles. They're making it easier. And their argument is it should be easier. And conservatives say, no, it should be harder. And the truth is, voting should require some civic responsibility and duty. It is absolutely insane that you need an ID for the movies, for beer, for cigarettes, for almost everything. To go to the DMV, you even actually have to have identification to get an ID. To get your ID, you need ID. Isn't that crazy? Well, you need like birth certificate, social security card, a piece of mail, and then they'll give you your ID. You can't just walk in and be like, I am who I am. They'll tell you to get out. Yet you can walk into a voting booth, a polling station and be like, I am who I am. They'll say, welcome aboard. Please change the rules of government. That's insane. And that's what they're doing. They say HR1, among other initiatives, would cement many of those temporary expansions, the ones we've seen so far. Well, actually, let me go back a little bit. They say Democrats are hoping the 2020 election gives them an argument for this bill due to COVID-19. Americans in many states were given more options and flexibility to vote through the mail or with in-person early voting. The results were a record 158.4 million ballots cast. 2020 presidential election turnout was about 7 percentage points higher than in 2016. They say HR1 would cement many of those temporary expansions, and recent polling from the progressive firm Data for Progress showed the bill more broadly is popular across parties and supported by a majority of Democratic, Independent, and Republican voters. I'll also point out that Cuomo is favored 2-1 by Democrats, and he literally killed 15,000 people. I'm not exaggerating. So yeah, forgive me if I don't think progressive polling is all that great. Republican legislatures in multiple states, however, are moving in the opposite direction. Per the Brennan Center, at least 33 states have already introduced, pre-filed, or carried over 165 restrictive bills to retighten voting requirements, including Georgia, the state that gave Democrats narrow control of the Senate. The U.S. Supreme Court is currently hearing arguments in an Arizona case that could further weaken the Voting Rights Act, limiting protections for minority voters around the country. What they're trying to do is make it seem like Republicans are evil and trying to cheat. And you could theoretically argue the same thing for both sides. The Democrats are trying to pass legislation that will make it easier for them to win. Republicans are trying to pass legislation that will make it easier for them to win. The Republican argument is that, well, we're securing the voting process to avoid corruption and fraud. And the Democrats are saying we're trying to make sure everyone has a chance to vote. And one of the things HR1 does is it makes Election Day a national holiday. I think it should be. It allows early voting. I actually agree with early voting. But I do think that there should be security with it, like voter ID should be mandatory for all voting. I don't care if you want to have early voting. I think the problem is there are people who work in this country who don't have time to take off to go vote. So making voting Election Day a holiday, I absolutely agree with. Having early voting, I think is absolutely fine, so long as we tighten security around them. You want to expand voter access? Yes, increase the security. Both sides have some points to be made. The problem I have is that Democrats are consistently saying no security. They want to take away certain voter signature verification rules. Why? That I don't trust. Now, the Democrats accuse Republicans of purging voter rolls and things like that to suppress the vote. Listen, maybe, yes, there's an argument there. But you do need to clean voter rolls because people move and people die. It's insane to me that we are not doing more to provide election security. You want mail-in voting? Fine. But then we need a very strict security and verification process like we do with absentee ballots and the chain of custody. You must request it. You must sign for it. You must then, provide identification and then mail it back in. I do not think it is fair that I must forego the integrity of my elections because you want to pass this bill through. If you come to me and say national holiday, early voting, mail-in voting, I say that sounds fantastic. You want to help people vote? That sounds great. Now, voter ID, yes, absolutely. And chain of custody, yes. And some people have said, make poll workers wear body cameras. And I'm also kind of like, yeah, why not? Why shouldn't we have cameras in every polling place? We know through public data if you voted. We don't need to see who you voted for. But think about it this way. You want to end all of these arguments about fraud, Democrats? It's simple. All you do is put cameras in every polling place. That's it. Live stream it, why don't you? And then when someone goes in to vote, you will see that person smile and wave, and they'll sign paperwork. We know who came in to vote. We don't know who they voted for. It's a secret ballot. But then there will be no argument of fraud. They'll be like, look at this guy. He didn't really. Oh, that's actually the guy. Well, what about his address? Oh, it was a typo. You see? Why shouldn't Democrats want that? I'm in favor of early voting and mail-in voting. What about security measures? Why is there no compromise? I don't know. Maybe because they really do want to cheat. They say Klobuchar told Vox that in past years when parties lost national elections, they'd assess where they went wrong. Republicans, he added, are doubling down on restricting voting access. It's all just lies. These guys, instead of doing that, are saying, let's just make it so less people vote. That's how we do this. I can't stand these people, man. I just can't. So what's in the bill? They say it creates a new national automatic voter registration that asks voters to opt out rather than opt in, ensuring more people will be signed up to vote, requires chief state election officials to automatically register eligible unregistered citizens. I am in favor of this. However, I believe following the automatic registration process, there should be a voter roll audit to make sure at a certain point that we didn't accidentally register people who should not have been registered. Requires each state to put online options for voter registration, correction, cancellation, or designating party affiliation. I am also in favor of this. But again, we need very strict security and some kind of verification process, which would mean you should request it, receive a card in the mail, a code. You then provide that code for online registration. You're good to go. Require at least 15 consecutive days of early voting for federal elections. Early voting sites would be open for at least 10 hours per day. The bill also prohibits states from restricting a person's ability to vote by mail and requires states to prepay postage on return envelopes for mail-in voting. I'm in favor of this as well. A lot of Republicans have said that we should have 1 day to vote. The Constitution actually specifies there is 1 day to vote. But I think we have people with different jobs, different shifts, and providing an extended period of time for people to vote is great, so long as there is voter ID and security. It's really just that simple. Establish independent redistricting commissions in states as a way to draw new congressional districts and end partisan gerrymandering in federal elections. That I disagree with. You may have seen those images where they explain how gerrymandering works and how it's a trick and manipulation. No. What they'll do is they'll show you there's 5 rows of 5 little cubes, little squares. And 3 of each of the rows is blue and 2 of each of the rows is red. They'll say, if each of these is a district and each district is, 3/5 Democrat and 2/5 Republican, the Democrats would have the majority and the whole voting block would be a Democrat voting block. Gerrymandering allows drawing a district around only the red area so that they get access. And you can actually use gerrymandering to give the Republicans a majority in these districts. You probably understand this, but let me explain why gerrymandering actually is important. If we went by this simple districting, and I understand we still have problems with how districts are drawn, don't get me wrong. What ends up happening is, what if you have 40% of the population is Republican? but they never get a chance to have their voice heard. It is only ever majority rule. You end up with civil unrest for extended periods of time and instability. There must be periods by which the minority position is allowed a chance to legislate. That's why I think gerrymandering isn't as bad as they claim it is. Not that it's perfect. They say prohibits voter roll purging and bans the use of non-forwardable mail being used as a way to remove voters from rolls. We need to purge voter rolls. I mean, that's ridiculous. Sometimes people move. Restores voting rights to people convicted of felonies who have completed their sentences. However, the bill doesn't restore rights to felons currently serving sentences in a correctional facility. I completely agree with this. 100%. Felons, I don't care if they committed a crime, they pay their debt to society. Give them their gun and their voting rights. The Second Amendment doesn't say you can't have a gun if you committed a crime. It says you can't have a gun. So felons, when they get out, they've paid their debt to society. They've made mistakes. Give them their guns back and give them their voting rights back. Campaign finance establishes public financing for campaigns powered by small donations. It has long been Sarbanes' vision. The federal government would provide a voluntary 6-to-1 match for candidates for president and Congress, which means for every dollar a candidate raises from small donations, the federal government would match it 6 times over. The maximum small donation that could be matched would be capped at $200. This program isn't funded by taxpayer dollars. Instead, the money would come from adding a 4.75% fee on criminal and civil fines, fees, penalties, and settlements with banks and corporations that commit corporate malfeasance like Wells Fargo. I'm actually in favor of that, too. I'll stress this point, my friends. I am not completely opposed to this bill. I said there's a lot of things in it that I like. The issue is voter security. It's that simple, right? Here's what I think needs to happen. They should get some of these things, but they will need to compromise with Republicans, and Republicans should counter with, okay, but require mandatory identification for everybody and auditing the voter roll, the voter registration rolls periodically, and you got to get rid of the purging thing. We do need the ability to have some kind of gerrymandering. We do. It's a weird thing to say, right? But I think I made my point. They say, supports a constitutional amendment to end Citizens United. I actually agree with that. I do not like Citizens United. And I know a lot of conservatives are saying money is speech. You have money. You can buy what you want. We regulate things you can buy. You can't buy certain things. I don't think you should be able to buy political influence at a certain degree. I don't like the idea that George Soros and Mackenzie Bezos can dump billions of dollars into critical race theory to help Democrats win, or that Michael Bloomberg or that Tom Steyer can flood the Democratic Party with all of this money to crush Republicans. I don't like that. I can call the Koch brothers, the Mercers, and all of them as well. But this one's for the conservatives. You want to understand why I don't like the ability to just spend endless amounts of cash on political campaigns? Because Mackenzie Bezos divorces Jeff, gets a massive amount of stock value, sells a bunch, and then gives $2 billion to critical race theory. I do not like this. Now, I get it. Listen, she'd still be allowed to do it. Giving money to nonprofits who promote critical race theory and critical theory in general, she's allowed to do. When it comes to funding super PACs, however, look at what Bloomberg was doing. Look at what George Soros does. OK, and again, criticism towards any other billionaire. I get it. It's too much power for one person over our politics. I'm not a fan. Passes the Disclose Act, pushed by Rep. David Cicilline and Sheldon Whitehouse, both Democrats from Rhode Island, that would require super PACs and dark money political organizations to make their donors public. I agree. Why? Because some of these progressive squad members have been accused of using dark money as well. Light it up. I want to know what these people are doing. I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat. Passes the Honest Ads Act, championed by Senator Klobuchar and Mark Warner, would require Facebook and Twitter to disclose the source of money for political ads on their platform and share how much money was spent. I agree. Discloses any political spending by government contractors and slows the flow of foreign money into the elections by targeting shell companies. Also good. Restructures the Federal Election Commission to have 5 commissioners instead of 6 in order to break political gridlock at the organization. Also good. Prohibits any coordination between candidates and super PACs. Absolutely good. Ethics. It would require the president and vice president to disclose 10 years of his or her tax returns. Completely disagree. People running for office are private citizens. They do not need to disclose their private tax returns. I disagree with this because some of these people may simply have things on their tax returns about medical bills, and it's none of your business. Stops members of Congress from using taxpayer money to settle harassment or discrimination cases. Yes, please. Gives the Office of Government Ethics the power to do more oversight and enforcement and implement stricter lobbying registration requirements. These include more oversight. I like it. Creates a new ethics code for the U.S. Supreme Court, ensuring all branches of government are impacted by the new law. I want to stress one very important point. These are bullet points put up by Vox, and I was very critical of their framing in the first place. So I'd have to actually go through the whole bill to see what's really happening because, well, my friends, it's fairly obvious. A lot of this is just propaganda. They tell you it's an anti-corruption bill. I wonder what they leave out and if the key issue here is framing. They say it supports a constitutional amendment to end Citizens United, but does it actually include other things around it? Are they oversimplifying? Does it theoretically grant Democrats more power in certain positions? Does it allow government bureaucrats to actually fill certain roles like they show here, the government funding certain political campaigns? I'll put it this way. I'm glad the filibuster exists. I don't know whether or not this is the apocalypse. I do think it will be a huge hurdle for Republicans in a lot of ways. I think Republicans have an opportunity to make a lot of really good things happen. In the House, the Democrats had no reason to negotiate with Republicans, creating a bill that is probably just on its face a failure. There are many things in this I think are wrong and should not be passed. However, when it comes to the Senate, there's an opportunity for compromise, and perhaps the Republicans could come in and present some real arguments, similar ones to that I've made here, and we could actually bring about some real positive change. I think we need some reform. I do not like billionaires dumping their money into our elections. Sorry, I just don't. I don't care if you're a conservative and you support Mitch McConnell and all that. I think regular Americans, working class Americans, be it Trump supporters or Democrats, are sick and tired of billionaires, big bank bailouts, revolving door politics with these big corporations. And I see some things in this bill that may actually be good. But you know what that means? It means it's time to start negotiating with Republicans and making sure that this is not the apocalyptic bill people fear it is. And there's got to be a bunch of stuff stripped out of this. And there's got to be security added to it. We'll see how things go. Next segment's coming up at 4 p.m. over at youtube.com/Timcast. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.